In this podcast episode, Dr. Andrew Huberman converses with Dr. Marie-Pierre St-Onge, a professor of nutritional medicine at Columbia University, about the intricate two-way relationship between sleep and nutrition. The discussion spans how varying sleep durations affect appetite and metabolism differently in men and women, the influence of dietary choices on sleep quality, the roles of specific nutrients and foods on energy balance, the complexities surrounding industry-funded research, and practical implications for improving overall metabolic and cardiovascular health through integrated lifestyle interventions. Dr. St-Onge begins by outlining large population studies linking short sleep duration with higher body mass index, BMI, and increased risk of obesity. She highlights a landmark longitudinal study of nurses over 14 years demonstrating greater weight gain in those sleeping 5 to 6 hours versus 7 to 8 hours per night. However, population data alone do not establish causality, prompting her lab to conduct controlled crossover studies examining the direct impact of sleep restriction on energy balance and appetite regulation. In one such study, participants experienced 5 nights of either adequate, around 7 5-hours, or severely restricted sleep, approximately 4 hours. Under controlled feeding conditions, men exhibited elevated ghrelin, a hunger-promoting hormone, during sleep restriction, whereas women had reduced levels of GLP-1, a satiety hormone. These sex-specific hormonal responses helped explain why men may feel increased hunger while women experience diminished satiety signals during insufficient sleep. Consistent with these hormonal changes, both men and women consumed approximately 300 extra calories per day during restricted sleep. Brain imaging further revealed heightened activation of reward centers in response to food stimuli during sleep deprivation, indicating increased hedonic drive to eat. Despite increased hormonal hunger signals, energy expenditure measurements within a metabolic chamber showed a counterintuitive slight increase during sleep restriction because staying awake requires more energy than sleeping. However, the increase in expenditure, 90 calories, was insufficient to offset the increased caloric intake, producing a positive energy balance and potential weight gain over time. Dr. St-Onge discusses the metabolic consequences of sustained, mild sleep restriction typically observed in free-living conditions. While severe, short-term sleep restriction in controlled settings did not alter cortisol, glucose, or lipid profiles when food intake was fixed, a longer-term 6-week study with a modest 1 5-hour reduction in nightly sleep from 7/5 to 6 hours in free-living adults showed increased insulin resistance, reduced insulin sensitivity, and higher blood pressure. Notably, postmenopausal women appeared especially vulnerable to these adverse cardiometabolic effects. These results underscore that metabolic dysfunction linked to sleep loss likely emerges from the interaction of inadequate sleep with less controlled environmental factors, including spontaneous increases in calorie consumption, poorer diet quality, and reduced physical activity. The benign cortisol profiles observed under laboratory conditions reflect the absence of external daily life stressors, which normally augment physiological stress responses during poor sleep. Shifting focus, Dr. St-Onge details how dietary composition directly affects sleep quality. Using polysomnography, her lab examined how participants' ad libitum diets compared to a controlled feeding condition influenced their sleep patterns. When self-selecting foods, individuals consumed approximately 450 extra calories, 33% more saturated fat, and slightly more carbohydrates, which correlated with poorer sleep outcomes, including longer latency to fall asleep and a 20 to 23% reduction in slow-wave, deep sleep. Further analysis revealed that higher daily fiber intake associated with increased deep sleep, while greater saturated fat consumption correlated with decreased deep sleep. Diets rich in refined carbohydrates and simple sugars were linked to increased nocturnal arousals, moments where sleep became lighter without full awakening, thus reducing restorative sleep stages such as slow-wave and REM sleep. Although the study didn't track meal timing, Dr. St-Onge personally recommends finishing meals at least 3 hours before bedtime to support optimal sleep, citing thermogenic effects of food that can raise body temperature and disrupt nighttime cooling essential for sleep onset. A critical insight from Dr. St-Onge's research is the impact of meal timing on fat metabolism. In a study where participants consumed identical meals over a 10-hour window, shifting the first meal from 1 hour after waking to 5 hours after waking significantly decreased fat oxidation later in the day. This suggests that concentrating food intake earlier in the day, roughly in the first two-thirds of waking hours, supports better metabolic health and weight management compared to late eating patterns common in certain cultures or urban lifestyles. Her commentary aligns with data from other investigators, such as Marta Geroulet in Spain, indicating that earlier, larger meals, e.g. lunch, correlate with improved weight loss outcomes, even in societies with traditionally late dinners. Dr. St-Onge also notes the interplay between timing, sleep, and metabolism. Eating earlier helps consolidate better sleep, which then supports healthier eating behaviors and metabolic function, creating a positive feedback loop. Dr. St-Onge shares her long-standing interest in functional foods, those conferring health benefits beyond basic nutrition. Medium-chain triglycerides, MCTs, were a central part of her PhD work. Unlike long-chain fatty acids, MCTs are rapidly metabolized in the liver, elevating the thermic effect of food by roughly 45 to 60 calories per meal and promoting slight increases in resting energy expenditure. Clinical trials with purified MCT oil versus olive oil demonstrated modestly greater weight loss and improvements in body composition among overweight adults when consumed regularly as part of a controlled diet, replacing conventional fats rather than added on top. Separately, her lab evaluated ginger's ability to enhance the thermic effect of food through capsaicin receptor activation, finding significantly increased calorie expenditure over 6 hours after a single administration. These findings suggest that incorporating functional spices like ginger may augment energy metabolism in practical ways, although additive or synergistic effects with MCTs remain unexplored. Regarding fermented foods such as kefir and low-sugar fermented vegetables, e.g. kimchi, sauerkraut, Dr. St-Onge supports their inclusion in diets due to potential benefits on gut microbiome diversity and inflammation reduction. However, a kefir trial she conducted showed no impact on cholesterol synthesis in men with mildly elevated cholesterol. She emphasizes, however, that such foods have pleiotropic effects that may not show in every measured outcome and encourages considering their role in overall gut health. The podcast highlights notable sex-specific distinctions. Women generally report poorer subjective sleep quality than men, despite objectively sleeping longer. Hormonal fluctuations across menstrual cycles and life stages, as well as socio-cultural factors and caregiving roles, contribute to these differences. Women show greater sensitivity to the adverse effects of insufficient sleep on metabolic and cardiovascular parameters such as blood pressure and insulin resistance, with postmenopausal women being particularly vulnerable. Dr. St-Onge stresses the importance of clinicians probing beyond mere sleep duration to assess sleep quality, circadian factors, satisfaction, daytime functioning, and symptoms, as this more comprehensive approach can identify individuals at risk and improve health outcomes through targeted interventions. The conversation touches on the relationship between sleep loss and physiological stress. Surprisingly, laboratory conditions of severe short-term sleep deprivation, 4 hours night for 5 nights, did not alter basal cortisol levels, a primary stress hormone regulated by circadian rhythms. This absence of elevated cortisol might be due to the controlled, low-stress setting, devoid of typical psychosocial and environmental stressors encountered in day-to-day life. Persistent insufficient sleep in real-world settings, combined with lifestyle challenges, likely amplifies stress responses and inflammation, thereby exacerbating metabolic dysfunction. While the link of sleep deprivation with systemic inflammation is well documented, the podcast underscores that individual responses vary and that inflammation is one component of a complex physiological disruption. Dr. St-Onge provides candid insight into industry-sponsored studies. She clarifies that while companies fund nutrition research, sometimes to test proprietary products or formulations, academic investigators maintain control over study design, data analysis, and publication decisions to preserve scientific integrity. The contract agreements ensure unconditional right to publish results, including null or negative findings, though publication bias against null results is a broader challenge in science. She emphasizes that scientific misconduct is rare, regardless of funding source, and stresses the importance of transparent, rigorous research. Industry partnerships sometimes facilitate studies that would otherwise be infeasible due to resource limitations, especially when examining specific branded or novel food products. The dialogue touches upon cultural and historical differences in dietary habits, including portion sizes and food formulations between countries. For example, yogurt and bread are sweeter and more processed in the US compared to Canada and Europe, influencing overall dietary quality and health. The availability of mostly processed products and the convenience food culture in the US often conflicts with optimal nutrition goals. Dr. St-Onge encourages greater nutritional literacy among consumers to navigate food labels and make informed decisions while recognizing social and logistical barriers to home cooking and whole food consumption. The increasing use of GLP-1 analogs in the population has also begun altering appetite and food intake patterns, potentially impacting the prevalence of obesity and related diseases. Throughout the discussion, Dr. St-Onge advocates for dietary patterns emphasizing Mediterranean and DASH-style diets, rich in fruits, vegetables, nuts, olive oil, legumes, and lean proteins, which are associated with better sleep and metabolic health outcomes. She notes that such diets align with improved sleep duration and quality in large cohort studies. Meal timing, avoiding eating close to bedtime, and incorporating functional foods like MCT oil and ginger may provide incremental benefits for weight management and sleep quality. Additionally, fiber intake correlates positively with deep sleep, though individual responses vary and sustainable dietary changes should be personalized. She underscores the synergy of prioritizing both sleep and nutrition simultaneously, as poor habits in one domain negatively feed back onto the other, fostering a vicious cycle, whereas improvements propagate a virtuous cycle supporting long-term health.